Thank you for tuning in to the GSMC Sports Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, Nelson. Again, suffering some major technical difficulties. Now, for some reason, my OBS is being weird in the sense that I literally cannot change the titles on OBS, but we're going to deal with it, so I'm changing the titles right now. If you guys will give me 1 second. There we go. That should be the end of that. Now, in this segment, we are going to talk about, in the first segment of this podcast, we're going to talk about Brian Daboll and Jeremy Schoen's jobs and how they are safe, how the Giants do not intend on firing them, and just my overall opinions on that. I think it's a little bit different than, at least everyone else's opinions, because for the most part, whenever I talk to people about it, they don't really seem all too keen on the fact that these two are returning. But we'll get into that when we get into that. Then in the second segment, I'm going to talk about the possibility of a trade that could send Jimmy Butler to Milwaukee, what Milwaukee would have to give up in order to receive Jimmy Butler, what Miami might be looking for in such a trade package, and things like that. And then in the third segment, we're going to talk about Bradley Beal and his no trade clause, because he had a couple of things to say after trade rumors of him started to surface. So we're going to talk a little bit about that in the third segment. And then in the fourth segment, I'm going to talk about the Karl-Anthony Towns trade that happened to begin the NBA season, when the Timberwolves decided to trade Karl-Anthony Towns all the way to the Knicks. And I will give my opinions on that trade and whether or not it's the worst trade in the history of the NBA. So that is going to be essentially what this is, what that fourth segment is going to be. We also have a special fifth segment at the end of the fourth segment, so be sure to stay tuned for that if you guys are interested. Before I begin, I would like to remind everybody that we love to hear what you guys have to say during the show, whether it's a hot take, whether it's a burning question, or something that you guys are dying to share. We're all ears, and if you really want your comment and or question to get noticed, then I recommend using Super Chat. You just click on the $ below the chat box, and you can send in your comments and or donations that way. And if Super Chat's not really your thing, then you can always go ahead and use the link displayed below the ticker on every single show segment, and you can send in your comments and or donations that way. GSMCpodcast.net. Again, either or, they really help the show. They make it much more interactive between myself and you guys. And with that out of the way, let's go ahead, get into this first segment, which is talking all about Jeremy Schoen and Brian Daboll's jobs. So I'm sure most of you guys know that towards the end of the season, this is usually where several coaches are getting fired. This is where several teams are trying to get new GMs. Recently the Patriots, they fired their head coach literally the minute after the final game of their season, and it seemed like that one was already going to happen. That was a conversation that they must have had for a long time. But in a statement released a couple days ago, the Giants said that they intend on keeping Jeremy Schoen and they intend on keeping Brian Daboll. Now, I have no problem with Brian Daboll returning as the head coach. Anyone that can make Daniel Jones look like a future franchise quarterback is a good coach. I'm sorry to say this, but that is literally what this is. And for the most part, at least for the beginning of his season, it definitely looked like Daniel Jones could have done that, but we all know how that turned out. He is awful. He is one of the worst starting quarterbacks in the history of starting quarterbacks, and he's only going to be remembered as being an absolute bust for the New York Giants. And the fact that Daboll made him actually look like a competent starter is something that I don't think any coach in the history of coaches would be able to do. It's that bad. So I have no problem with Daboll getting a longer period of time to coach, as opposed to some other coaches who immediately get fired after 3 years. Because one of the worst things that you can have is not having a culture and being unable to like create a culture in that locker room and create your own identity. That's been the problem that the Giants have had, because they always, and as well as the Jets, because they keep hiring, they keep firing, they keep hiring, they keep firing. It's not good for your franchise, and it's not good to it does not guarantee success at all. And I think having Brian Daboll as the coach, the team wasn't bad because of Brian Daboll. The team was bad because of terrible quarterbacks. That's simply put. The team was bad because of terrible quarterbacks. The defense was solid when it needed to be. The receivers were great, Malik specifically. The running back was also great. Good for the most part. It's just when they needed a quarterback to win the game for them, they could not. It just never happened. I mean, you can't. Daniel Jones was awful. He was terrible, bad. Just I can go on a whole 12-minute segment just talking about how bad he was. But that's besides the point. The big problem that I have is Schoen. That's really the big problem that I have. And it's unfortunate, because my big problem with him is that he chose Saquon. He chose to drop Saquon over Daniel Jones. And that was really the biggest issue that I had. He really thought that there was that whole episode is just haunting Giants fans for the entirety of their lives for a very long time. Because in that room, there were so many people, him included, that did not think that that teams weren't going to pay for a running back as good as Saquon Barkley. And I mean, thankfully, there was this one beautiful soul in that room that said, "Are we sure that no one is going to pay a running back all that money?" And then they were contradicting him, like, okay, well, who would do that? And then he said, well, anyone who really needs a difference maker, anyone who has money to spare, they would definitely spend it on Saquon Barkley. Like, he knew, and the irony of it all was that they did not want to regret their decision and be like, if he joins the Eagles, I don't think I'm going to sleep at night. And lo and behold, he joins the Eagles and just dominates the entire year. Meanwhile, we're stuck with a quarterback that can barely throw the ball farther than 20 yards down the field. It was embarrassing. It's been probably the biggest failure of Schoen as a GM, and like the biggest failure by far. Aside from giving Daniel Jones that gigantic contract, letting Saquon walk was the biggest failure in my opinion. And it's sad, but it's like I wish there was a because on one end I know that I'm only saying that I want him gone because of that most recent decision. However, in the grand scheme of things, he has drafted a lot of talent for this team. We just can't use it because we have a terrible quarterback. So, I mean, Jalen Hyatt, he barely gets touched because Daniel Jones cannot throw the ball farther than 20 yards down the field, so he's effectively useless. And that, Jalen Hyatt is primarily a deep threat on a lot of these routes. He is so fast, but we can't use him because the quarterbacks can't hit and can't throw accurate enough down the field, 20 yards, 30 plus yards down the field. They can't do that. And not only that, on the defensive side, he's also been able to acquire a lot of talent. We know Dexter Lawrence is that guy. Xavier McKinney, before we let him walk as well and go to Green Bay. Just so many talented players. So he knows how to find talent. That's definitely that is a truth. And I feel like you sort of need that going into the future. But at the same time, picking Daniel Jones over Saquon is going to be the biggest mistake of his entire life. And I will say, however, that in my opinion, I think the media is over-exaggerating it just a little bit, because I don't think Saquon would have performed nearly as well as he did this season if he were on the Giants. I don't think he would have had a 2,000-yard rushing season, let alone maybe a 1,600-yard rushing season. I don't think that would have happened. Tyrone Tracy recorded 1,000 yards in the season, so it shows that letting Saquon walk it wasn't all bad of a decision. It's just worse of a decision because Daniel Jones stinks. So if he would have played, like, if he even looked like just a little bit of a competent quarterback, then the record that the Giants have this year would look so much more different. And I genuinely think that the only thing that the Giants need at this moment to look competent, just to look competent, is a quarterback. That's the only thing we need, and we are in prime position to get a quarterback. Either that, or we get Travis Hunter, which I don't have a problem with either, since the Giants are the third pick in the NFL draft. No problem with either or. But that's all that I have. Let me know in the comments what you guys think, whether you guys agree with the fact that he should, that either one of these guys should have a job, or maybe you disagree and you think they both should get fired. But now we're going to go into the second segment where I talk about Jimmy Butler and the trade rumors and a team that I think would work best for Jimmy Butler. So I'll be right back after this short break.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign.
I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. Oh.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
And we are back with the second segment of the GSMC Sports Podcast, presented by the GSMC Sports Network. And in this second segment, we're going to be talking about the Jimmy Butler trade and possible trade scenarios that I think could work for him. Specifically, one team that I think would work best for Jimmy Butler in this season. And before I begin, I would like to remind everybody that we love to hear what you guys have to say during the show, whether it's a hot take or a burning question or just something that you've been dying to share. We're all ears, and if you really want your comment and or question to get noticed, then I recommend using Super Chat. You just click on the $ below the chat box, and you can send in your comments and or donations that way. If Super Chat's not really your thing, then you can always use the link displayed below the ticker, gsmcpodcast.net, and you can send in your comments and or donations that way. Either or helps the show, makes it much more interactive between myself and you guys. So with that out of the way, let's go ahead and talk about the possibility of Jimmy going to Milwaukee, as you could see by the little ticker on the screen right there. I think that, so we know the Bucks, they are bad. I'm sorry to say this, they're bad. They're an overrated team, and they're not going in the right direction at all. I mean, they did beat the Raptors, but again, the Raptors are trying to get Cooper Flag, so not a very positive win coming in from the Bucks. And a few weeks ago, they ended up losing to the Brooklyn Nets. They also lost to the Portland Trailblazers. So this Bucks team is not the same Bucks team that we saw when they won the championship, obviously. And honestly, I feel like this Bucks team has regressed ever since they acquired Doc Rivers. I'm not a big fan of Doc Rivers. I think he's one of the worst coaches in the history of the NBA, and at least the worst coach with a championship ring on his resume. He is definitely the worst, and it's been a struggle for the Bucks. They lose these easy games that should be winnable. And with Giannis dropping 30 points per game, 12 rebounds per game, and around 5 to 6 assists per game, it's a big waste on his talent. The roster is not that competent aside from Damian Lillard and Giannis Antetokounmpo, and I think that they need to add like another option, because when they did win a championship, while they did have Giannis and Drew Holiday, they also had Chris Middleton. You can make the argument that Middleton was the second option and Drew Holiday was the third option, but regardless, they had a solid third option that they could rely on in the postseason and during a lot of the games in the regular season. So the fact that they don't have that now, I mean, you could argue that it is Bobby Portis, but I don't think Bobby Portis does enough for the team that allows them to win. Or maybe it's just the rest of the roster. Let me know what you guys think. But there is a couple of trades that could work in the Bucks' favor to try and get Jimmy Butler over to Milwaukee. So I feel like the Bucks, they might be a little bit of a dark horse candidate, because the Grizzlies, I think the Grizzlies could be even, like, if there was any team that could threaten the Bucks in their trying to trade for Jimmy, it would be the Memphis Grizzlies. I think that would be a pretty good situation for Jimmy to be in. That would be a nightmare for the GMs and the coaches, because now they'd have to deal not just with Ja Morant stuff, but they'd have to deal with Jimmy Butler stuff. And also Houston is another option, but we're going to focus a little bit more on Milwaukee, because we know Houston and Memphis, they have the necessary pieces to make that trade. But will they be championship contenders after they make that trade? The Memphis Grizzlies, yes, we already know that. The Houston Rockets, I'm not entirely so sure, but it's still possible. I'm not going to throw that idea completely out of the window, but looking more closely at the Bucks, like, obviously the Bucks, of either all the teams that I just mentioned, between Memphis, Houston, and the Bucks are the team that I think desperately need to make a move more so than those other two teams, because those other two teams are able to find success with the roster that they have currently, and I'm not entirely sure if I would want to change that, right? The Bucks, however, they definitely need to make a change, and they went on a win streak from November 18th to December 3rd, but still they're 6-7 since the 7-game stretch and 1-4 in their last 5 games. So they're bad. They're terrible. And the Jimmy Butler trade might be the right move for the Bucks. If they want to make the NBA Finals again, they're obviously, like, right now, currently, they're not moving in the right direction at all. And a trade for Jimmy Butler is Butler, we know, is one of the most complete players in the NBA right now, and it might allow them to steer off in a different course. Now, he's improved defenses, and he'll improve the defense of the Bucks, which is a major problem, because the Bucks, aside from Giannis Antetokounmpo, they cannot guard on the perimeter. I've said this every single time about Damian Lillard when he was on Portland, and now even more so when he's on the Bucks. This is one of the many reasons why Damian Lillard has not been able to accomplish anything great in the postseason outside of 2019. The teams being awful at perimeter defense and defense in general. Portland has never been known as a defensive team when they had Damian Lillard. Combine that with CJ McCollum, that is a terrible defense at the guard positions. And now on Milwaukee, he's no better. I mean, Dame is only getting older, so he can only move so much on the defensive end of the ball. Now, I definitely think that pairing Jimmy Butler up with those two, like, they will get a pretty solid defending duo between Jimmy and Giannis Antetokounmpo, and they would also get a solid option on the offensive side of the ball. As of right now, Giannis is the only player on the Bucks team that's capable of playing offense and defense. They don't have many two-way players on the roster. And the only problem is Butler's injury history. It won't make him reliable in terms of availability. However, it is a better fit for what the Milwaukee Bucks currently need right now. Now, the challenge of getting Jimmy Butler all starts with getting below the second apron. That's the biggest challenge. Milwaukee is $6.5 million above the second apron, and they would likely have to get below it in order to make a Jimmy Butler trade. So it shouldn't be too hard if they're motivated enough to go and acquire Jimmy. One option that they do have is sending Pat Connaughton and his $9.4 million contract to a team that can absorb him into their cap space, like the Detroit Pistons, or a trade exception. And these types of transactions, they require a team trying to shed salary to include second-round picks in the package. The Bucks just have one second-round pick through 2031, but that might be enough to make this deal work. Another option would be to trade young players like Marjon Beauchamp, Chris Livingston, and AJ Johnson in a series of smaller deals due to their affordability and potential. Milwaukee might even be able to receive some draft capital if they make some of these moves. After that, the Bucks will have to see whether or not the Heat prefer a combination of Chris Middleton and Bobby Portis, or swapping Jimmy Butler for Damian Lillard, which I think would be bad for the Bucks. I don't think giving up Damian Lillard is the right move. They should primarily look to see if they want, if the Heat would want Chris Middleton and Bobby Portis in a package. I think that would suit their needs a little bit more. But again, they are in an era where the star players and like big threes, they aren't the same anymore. So maybe Miami wouldn't really want to do that kind of swap, considering how they already have Tyler Hero at the guard position, and he's been pretty solid, at least production wise. He's no Damian Lillard, of course, but he's been solid, and we'll see how it goes. Now, with the Middleton and Portis package, if the Heat would prefer a package with those two, they'll have to add a couple of smaller contracts to make the salaries match. And as a result, they would probably prefer to move Connaughton in this situation, like in this trade. However, this is a swap that allowed the Bucks to enhance their perimeter defense, in my opinion. Middleton, when healthy, and Portis are really good on the offense, but Middleton has taken a huge dip in the defensive side of the ball. Like, the problem with them, and the big problem with the Bucks, is that they lack the ability to lock down their opponents on the other end, both Portis and Chris Middleton. And that's really, like, with Bam Adebayo being the starting center, really, you'll have a pretty solid scoring option coming off of the bench, but if you need defense, you'll have Bam Adebayo. So I feel like, it could work for Miami as well as working for the Bucks as well. Now, another thing that makes it awkward for Miami is just the fact that they lack the defense. Now, Miami ranks 21st in points per game, and they could definitely use some more pieces on the offensive side of the ball. However, the Heat, they have built a reputation for defensive-minded teams, so not sure how that's going to work well with the trading, but again, it could. Now, if they want a Damian Lillard in the package, that's going to make things a little bit more tricky, because I'm not entirely sure whether or not the Bucks would get better or worse if they get rid of Damian Lillard and they just swap players. So Miami would likely prefer to acquire Damian Lillard. I mean, they wanted to get Damian Lillard before the Bucks stole him from him. And I remember a 2 years ago, technically about to be, the Miami Heat, they were the favorites to acquire Damian Lillard, and out of nowhere, the Bucks just swooped in and yoinked him. Now, not only is Damian Lillard likely the best player to for the Bucks to make available in trades, they only have to be concerned about one player's defense rather than two players' defense on Miami's end, excuse me. So, you only have to worry about Dame being bad at defense. You don't have to worry about Middleton and Portis being bad at defense. Furthermore, the Heat have also been reliant on Tyler Hero, who could use more help in the backcourt, and Damian Lillard could provide that. But again, the backcourt will have awful defense with Tyler Hero and Dame, which is something I'm not entirely sure they want to be near. But again, that's probably going to be the trade that if there was any trade that they might accept, it might be the putting Dame in that package. But see if you can put Chris Middleton and Bobby Portis in a package first before you ship off Dame. Now, to the point, Lillard is among the best scorers in the league, not just in his position, but in the entire league. However, he appears to be more efficient when he's sharing a backcourt with a volume scorer, like how he did with CJ McCollum. So maybe that would also encourage him to play. Well, not really encourage him to play, but maybe Damian Lillard will play a lot better having a strong backcourt duo as opposed to the relationship that they have now. Now, Milwaukee would probably be left without a starting point guard, yet Ryan Rollins' play earlier in this season breeds confidence in his ability to take over at that role. And additionally, the Bucks were able to win their last championship without a traditional point guard because Giannis Antetokounmpo is just that good of a player. Like, you could put Giannis at point guard and it would still work. So those are my thoughts and like my theories, I guess you could say, on the possibility of Dame going to Miami, whether or not the Bucks are going to give them up, whether or not they're going to try and team up those three, any sort of scenario that could happen. So, but again, that's all that I have in this second segment. So now we're going to go into the third segment where I talk about Bradley Beal and what he had to say about his name being involved in trade rumors, and given his contract status, whether or not teams are actually going to trade for him. So I'll be right back after this short break, so be sure to stay tuned.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
And we are back with the third segment of the GSMC Sports Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. And in this third segment, we are going to talk about Bradley Beal and his name being brought up in trade rumors. And already we have a comment coming in from Brennan Garcia saying Bradley Beal to Denver. That would be something. That would really be something. That might actually be what the Nuggets need to put them over the top. And what would make it even more hilarious is if the Nuggets decide to trade Russell Westbrook in order to bring Bradley Beal over. Because I think that would be hilarious. Because this would be another season where Russell Westbrook gets traded. Because this always happens to him. But we'll see how that goes. And again, that's actually a pretty solid trade idea, honestly. I doubt that the Nuggets are willing to give up somebody like Jamal Murray in that package, but that is interesting. That is definitely interesting. One team that I really did not think about, and the Denver Nuggets, they are a team that sort of needs to, well, they don't really need to make a move, but if they really want to be contenders, it seems like they might have to. I don't know. I feel like they just got to get their act together because they're not hitting nearly enough shots as they should. And they're relying a little bit too much on Jokic. And I think part of that is just because Jamal Murray has not been playing like the ridiculous shooter that he is when he goes up against the Lakers. But again, that might be why they want to start trading. So we'll see how this works. But essentially, Bradley Beal's name has sort of been all over trade talks. And it's been resurfacing a little bit more ever since he came off of the bench in the most recent game. Also, Manzano's in the chat. Does this show the incompetence of the ownership of both the Giants and the Dolphins that they're keeping their current general manager and coaching staff instead of cleaning house? No, I don't. For the Giants, at least, no. Because the Giants, they hire and fire every single time. They can never really establish an identity and a winning formula for their team, primarily because they keep hiring and firing, and they keep hiring and firing. So I don't think you clean house just yet. I think you keep Brian Daboll. You could probably get rid of Schoen because of that decision to get rid of Saquon and keep Daniel Jones. But at the end of the day, Schoen has made some really good moves at the GM and has acquired a lot of talent. And he's pretty solid at drafting these players. So, again, that one big mistake I don't think should really define him. But that's just me. Now, back on the Bradley Beal stuff, and he came off the bench. And ever since he came off the bench, now teams are like, well, the media is starting to think like, okay, well, it doesn't seem like they really want Bradley Beal because he's getting paid all of this money to come off the bench. Like, what is that? So it re-sparked some controversy that he might end up getting traded. And this is a problem, though, because Bradley Beal, on his contract, he has a no-trade clause. So that kind of stinks for the Suns. However, one thing that does not stink for the Suns is the fact that he is open to trading. He's definitely open to being traded. But the problem with this is that now that you can't really like send him to a team that's not in a contending position, and that makes things a little bit worse because you might threaten the other team getting better when they have Bradley Beal, as opposed to getting rid of Bradley Beal and acquiring talent and not having to worry about the team that Bradley Beal is on because they aren't going to do anything in the postseason, right? So Bradley Beal, he talked about the new role that he has coming off the bench. Coach made a decision. I'm not going to sit there and argue with him. I'm not going to sit here and be a distraction. I'm not going to sit here and be an a-hole. So, you can connect the dots. It's hard to read like too much on what Bradley Beal said, but he did one thing that everyone is talking about that he did say was that he holds the cards, thanks to his no trade clause on his contract. And that was the one thing that really stuck out in the post-game interview. And if reports are to be believed, there are only 3 teams that would get him to take the plunge in the no trade clause. And Beal is open to trade to 3 really big teams. So John Gombardo weighed into this matter, and he noted that Beal would waive his no-trade clause for 3 teams: the Lakers, the Miami Heat, and the Nuggets, which opens up a whole new can of possibilities for where Jimmy Butler could end up if they decide to do a player swap with Jimmy and Bradley Beal, sending Jimmy over to Phoenix and sending Bradley over to Miami. Could be something crazy. The Lakers, on the other hand, that's also another crazy move. I mean, the Lakers, they do need that one guard. Like, they always say, like, they're ready to put this blockbuster trade, and then, lo and behold, they just get rid of D'Lo. Like, blockbuster trade, ladies and gentlemen, for the Lakers. But if he does get traded to LA, I'm curious who LA would have to give up. And I'm also wondering whether or not that would really work like that. I'm not entirely sure just how much that would work. I mean, the Lakers, they do need the scoring, yes, but they also do need the defense. And I don't know if they really got all that. Bradley Beal would fit very well in the system, don't get me wrong. But I don't know. I'm not a really... Bradley Beal in the playoffs, they don't really mesh that well. Let me know in the comments what you guys think. Maybe I'm just, recency bias. But again, Bradley Beal in the playoffs, they don't really mesh, The Nuggets, on the other hand, that is probably the one team that I think would actually, like, of all those teams, I think that team would work very, very well for Bradley Beal. We know Jokic, he makes his teammates better, and he turns good scorers into great scorers. He turns good shooters into great shooters, and don't ask me how, he just does it. And the question is, are the Nuggets going to get rid of Jamal Murray to get Bradley Beal? I highly doubt that. I wouldn't be surprised if they try to get rid of Russell Westbrook, despite the good that Russell Westbrook has brought to the team. He also brings a lot of bad things, but, that's Russell Westbrook for you. He brings good and he brings a lot of bad. So you sort of have to pick and choose. They might give up Michael Porter Jr. Again, I think that's a terrible idea because, completely different positions. And even though Michael Porter just, shoots the ball for no apparent reason, I still think he's pretty solid on both ends of the floor. Solid. He's not a good defender, he's a solid defender. And, his height makes things a little bit more difficult for. Granted, he's more known for just chucking the ball up whenever he gets a shot, but shooters shoot. And I think Bradley Beal is more or less going to do the same thing. But yeah, him being on Phoenix is definitely not working because Phoenix lacks the defense. Devin Booker and Bradley Beal, they're really bad at defense. Kevin Durant is okay at defense, but again, he's more known for being an offensive-minded player. And the big reason why Kevin Durant is okay at defense is because of his length and, his wingspan, being able to get contests and being able to get blocks and cover a lot of ground with his length. That's really the big reason. That's not to say he is a bad defender. He's not a great defender. And the Heat is probably the most interesting option. Like, again, interesting. Not the best, but most interesting option. Because, Jimmy Butler also wants to part ways. And Jimmy Butler is also interested in going to the Suns. So perhaps this could be, a little bit of an avenue worth pursuing for Bradley Beal and for, each of those organizations. And, the fact that he got demoted to being on the bench, a little bit too much if you ask me. The way I see it, you can balance the minutes of each of those three players, Devin Booker, Kevin Durant, and Bradley Beal, with the bench and with the starters. You can balance that with the substitutions rather well, in my opinion, and I don't think putting Bradley Beal on the bench is the ideal situation, if that makes sense. I don't think that's the best move. And it definitely does not. That move definitely shows that, he's a little bit expendable, at least in the opinion of the Suns. And you kind of don't want that. You don't want a player to feel like he's expendable, especially with the amount of money that Bradley Beal is making on his contract. Let's go ahead and let me go ahead and check how much money he's actually making on his contract. I just know it is a lot of money. The big numbers you tend to forget most of the time. So his salary this season alone is going to be $50 million. That is a lot of money for somebody like Bradley Beal. He was good. He was worth it when he was on Washington, but this is hefty sums. This is hefty amounts of money. And then in the next year, in 2025 to 2026, he's going to make $53 million. And then after that, he's going to make $57 million. That is a lot of money. That's a huge amount of money. And his contract is 5 years, $251 million. That is a lot of money for Bradley Beal, someone who I genuinely don't think deserves that money anymore. And that's also going to affect a lot of teams wanting to trade for him, because are they really going to want to give Bradley Beal all that money? I'm not entirely sure if they're going to want to give him that much money, but we'll have to see how that goes out, how that works out. But that's all I have in this third segment. Let me know in the comments where you guys think Bradley Beal is going to end up after the trade deadline, I guess you could say. So now we're going to go ahead and go into the fourth segment, speaking of trades, where I talk about some of the worst trades in NBA history, and we're going to talk about the most recent one with Karl-Anthony Towns being traded over to the Knicks. I'll be right back after this short break, so be sure to stay tuned.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
And we are back with the fourth segment of the GSMC Sports Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. And in this fourth segment, we are going to be looking at some of the worst trades in the history of the NBA. And we're going to start out with the most recent one because this segment was inspired by the most recent one, the Karl-Anthony Towns trade. In my opinion, at least right now we have to wait until, the rest of the years with the Knicks develop. This might be the worst trade in the history of NBA basketball. Again, might be. We have to see how it develops, of course. But really, this is probably one of the worst trades because of the situation that the Timberwolves were in already with Karl-Anthony Towns. So just a little bit of a reminder. Last year, the Timberwolves, they made it as far as the Western Conference Finals with Karl-Anthony Towns, Anthony Edwards, and Rudy Gobert. I previously thought that the Rudy Gobert trade was the worst trade in NBA history, because why on earth would the Timberwolves give up so much capital and talent for somebody like Rudy Gobert? It just did not make any sense to me. But at the end of the day, I was proven wrong, and this team was able to do something that I never thought they would do, which was make it to the Western Conference Finals. And normally when a team makes it that far, you run it back with the same squad. But then out of nowhere, the Knicks decide to send the Timberwolves a package which encourages them to trade Karl-Anthony Towns. And it's completely backfired for the Timberwolves. And it's a lot of people, myself included, were questioning, like, why on earth would the Timberwolves give up Karl-Anthony Towns, a key player and a big reason why the team was able to make it to the Western Conference Finals in the first place, for a mediocre player like Julius Randle? Like, the Timberwolves now are the 9th seed. They're 18-17. The Knicks are the third best team in the NBA. Granted, they were still the third best team or the second best team in the NBA in the Western Conference. Excuse me, that was a hiccup right there. They were the second best team or the third best team in the Eastern Conference last season. So you could argue that not much has really changed. But Karl-Anthony Towns and his numbers are unbelievable in this season. He's averaging 25 points per game, and I believe he's also averaging 14 rebounds per game as well. His numbers are much better than what they were last season when he played with the Timberwolves. I mean, he went from 21 points per game to 25 points per game. He went from shooting 50% from the field to 55% from the field, and he went from 41% to 44%. Now, obviously, the defense is a little bit blah with Karl-Anthony Towns, but you don't get him because of the defense. You get him because you want to shoot that three. That's why you get him. And the fact that they decided to get rid of him for Julius Randle, who I think is one of the most incompetent playoff performers in one of the most incompetent playoff performers in recent history, it's a terrible move, in my opinion. I mean, you're giving up length, and you're giving up, yes, he can play make a little bit better, but really, is that what you want in a power forward with the situation that you're in with Rudy Gobert? I don't think so. And it's not like Julius Randle is a balanced defender or a better defender than Karl-Anthony Towns. Maybe even at the power forward position, he might not even be like a better defender than Karl-Anthony Towns. But I digress. I don't think that was a good trade, but there have been several other trades that you can make an argument are way worse than that. Like, for example, the Paul George trade, from sending him from the Thunder all the way to the Clippers. Remember, I'm sure all of you guys remember that trade. It's probably, with hindsight in mind now, probably one of the worst trades ever in the history of the Clippers franchise. And obviously, I'm talking about the Karl-Anthony Towns trade in hindsight, without hindsight. So maybe it won't be as good of a trade, or maybe it'll be seen as a better trade in the future. But as of right now, I think the Karl-Anthony Towns trade is a really, really bad one. But is it worse than the Clippers one? I'm not entirely sure, but it is really, really close. Because remember, the Clippers, they give up. I dumb it down by saying the Clippers gave up 1 million draft picks in order to acquire Paul George. And what makes it a bad trade is that the Clippers, they were expected to win a championship, and they did not do that. The duo of Paul George and Kawhi Leonard were barely able to play together in the postseason, and especially considering how Kawhi Leonard was bragging in commercials about how Los Angeles was his city, and he has no championship rings to show for it. And it's like, that's a really bad move. Not to mention what they had to give up for that. They had to give up Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, Danilo Gallinari, and 7 first-round picks. 7 for no championships. That is an awful trade. And it makes it even worse because Shai Gilgeous-Alexander is playing like an MVP caliber player. And the Thunder seem to be the favorites to winning the championship aside from the Boston Celtics. And it's like now it starts to seem like this is the worst trade in recent memory aside from the Karl-Anthony Towns trade, like with hindsight in mind, because again, Kawhi Leonard and Paul George, they had everything that they needed to win the championship and they just did not get it done. Some of the other trades that were really bad are more so bad because of what the players were able to accomplish later on in their career. But before I get into that, another trade that was really bad was the Houston Rockets trading for Charles Barkley from the Phoenix Suns. So Houston, they gave up their entire young core just to get Charles Barkley. Now, keep in mind, at this point, Houston had won back-to-back titles with Hakeem Olajuwon and Clyde Drexler. Now, they had a disappointing ending in 1995 to 1996, and they decided to trade for Charles Barkley in the 1996 offseason. And in the trade, the Rockets shipped away their entire young core of Robert Horry, Sam Cassell, Chucky Brown, and Mark Bryant to the Suns for Charles Barkley. And the biggest problem with this was that Charles Barkley was getting old. And he wasn't the best he wasn't one of the best players in the league at the time. And they started off strong, but they made it to the Western Conference Finals, but then they ended up losing to the Jazz. And that would be the furthest that Houston would end up making it in the playoffs with Barkley in the 4 seasons that he's there, which is all the more disappointing. And although the Suns never found much success, Cassell became a solid point guard, eventually winning a title with Boston in 2007-2008. And we all know how good Robert Horry had it with the championships. I mean, he has 7 of them and is considered by a lot of people one of the most clutch players of his time. And overall, this trade was just really bad for Houston. Another bad trade was the Bucks trading away Dirk Nowitzki to the Mavericks. But I feel like that trade isn't really as bad as people make it out, because you have no idea how good a rookie is going to be when they get drafted. You do not expect a rookie to just all of a sudden be the 3rd best power forward in the history of power forwards. You don't really expect that to happen all the time. One trade that I think might be worse than that is the Lakers trading for Russell Westbrook. The Lakers had everything. They were set to repeat in 2020-2021, and they were eliminated from the playoffs in the Suns. And then they thought, okay, we need a drastic move. We need to get another star. And so they add Russell Westbrook, who, in my opinion, is one of the most inconsistent and inefficient players in the history of the NBA. He brings a lot of good to the team, but he also brings a lot of bad. He only elevates. He's a floor raiser. He's not a ceiling raiser. He only elevates bad teams. He doesn't make good teams great. And that was something that the Lakers learned the hard way. So that's another trade that I think is really bad. And one of the worst trades in the history of worst trades, the Brooklyn Nets trading for Paul Pierce and Kevin Garnett, and the draft picks turning out to be Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum. That is a terrible trade because, now we have hindsight, and we see that the Celtics ended up winning a championship with those draft picks before the Nets were even able to make it to the finals. So, tough. Really tough on them. Another bad trade, but again, I don't really think it's that bad of a trade. This is a really bad trade. 76ers trading Wilt Chamberlain to the Lakers because Wilt Chamberlain came off of 3 straight MVPs. You trade away somebody who came off of 3 straight MVPs, that is a bad trade. Another bad trade, the Bucks trading away Kareem Abdul-Jabbar to the Lakers. Again, that's more so a hindsight trade because no one expected Kareem to win 5 rings for the Lakers. He was fantastic before and after he was on the Lakers, when he was on the Bucks. But still, I don't think anyone really expected that. Seattle Supersonics giving away Scottie Pippen to the Chicago Bulls and making the Chicago Bulls win 6 championships in the span of 8 years. That also might be another bad trade. The Hawks trading away Bill Russell to the Celtics, another bad trade. And the worst trade, one of the worst trades that a lot of people might think is the worst trade, is the Hornets trading Kobe Bryant to the Los Angeles Lakers. Now, we all know Kobe Bryant, he has 5 championships, and you do not expect a player that is 18 years old to be as legendary and as good of a player as Kobe Bryant. You never expect something like that. So I don't really think that should be considered as one of the worst trades. But again, let me know in the comments what you guys think about that trade, and whether you think maybe the Hawks trade with Bill Russell is worse than the Kobe trade, or maybe there was another trade that I just missed that is the worst trade in the history of the NBA. I mean, Trae Young getting traded over to Atlanta and Luka Doncic getting traded over to the Dallas Mavericks. That's a win-win, but some people might see that as a bad trade for the Hawks for whatever reason. But let me know in the comments what you guys think. But again, that Hornets trade, I don't think it's fair to say that's one of the worst trades in the history of the NBA because nobody really expects an 18-year-old to be as legendary and as iconic as Kobe Bryant. No one expects that to happen. But that's all that I have in this 4th segment. So now we're going to go ahead and go into the 5th segment where I just give a little recap of the NBA games that happened on Sunday as well as the NBA games that happened yesterday. So I'll be right back after this short break. Be sure to stay tuned. And we are back with the 5th and the final segment of the GSMC Sports Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. And in this 5th segment, we are going to talk about the NBA games that happened on Sunday and as well as the games that happened yesterday, because it's been a while since I've done one of these recaps, so I might as well go ahead and do it in this 5th segment. So might as well start off with the big one. The Lakers, they lost to the Houston Rockets. Austin Reeves had 21 and 10. Anthony Davis had 30 and 13. LeBron James, now at 40 years old, had 21, 13 and 9, showing zero signs of regression. And of course, because, that's just the power of LeBron. It wasn't enough to beat Houston, however, with Amen Thompson scoring 23 points and recording 16 rebounds. Jalen Green having a ridiculous 33-point game. And, Sengun was really quiet in this one, dropping only 14 points. But still, the fact that they were able to win in this game, I think, is rather surprising, considering how this team shot 35% from 3 compared to the Lakers shooting 44% from 3. So, not ideal for the Lakers at all. Now, the Kings, they ended up surprising the Golden State Warriors and beating them. I mean, the Warriors, they had 26 points, not 26 points, geez. Steph Curry had 26 points, but that was really all of the scoring that Golden State had, aside from Andrew Wiggins, who dropped 18 points, but again, that's not going to be enough for the Golden State Warriors to win a game whatsoever. The team as a whole shot 34% from the field, and this is the first solid win for the Kings. DeRozan had 12 points because, of course, Sabonis had 22 and 13, and Malik Monk had 26 and 12. This was also without De'Aaron Fox in this game, who is another player that's been emerging in trade talks, by the way. But still, this just shows that the Warriors, they're nowhere near as good of a team as people thought they were going to be in the beginning of the season. I saw this coming. Not sure if you guys saw this coming. The Thunder, they ended up beating the Boston Celtics, and this is without Chet Holmgren. I think this really should put them in the favorites to win the Western Conference conversations if they weren't in them already, because this team is dominating, and they're doing it without Chet Holmgren. And for those of you guys who thought Chet Holmgren should have been the Rookie of the Year and thought that he was robbed by Victor, this is exactly why he wasn't robbed. You get rid of Chet Holmgren, OKC is still a competent team. And the reason why they were such a competent team and the reason why they had such a good team record last year was because of Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. No one else. Chet helped, but Shai Gilgeous was the main piece of all that. Now, the Pelicans, they ended up beating the Wizards because the Wizards are bad, and there was no Jordan Poole in this game. Alexander Czar had 18 and 11. Kyle Kuzma had 28. And on the Pelicans side, CJ McCollum, he's back. He had 50 points the other day, but in this one he had 25. DeJounte Murray dropped the triple-double with 14, 10, and 12. And I don't think the Pelicans are going to be able to get on the right track, especially with their lack of Zion Williamson. But, again, we'll have to see how the rest of the season goes. The Cavs, they beat the Hornets because, of course, they did. They won 115-105. Darius Garland had 25. Donovan Mitchell had 19. Jared Allen had 19 and 11. And on the Hornets side, LaMelo Ball had 24 points, 3 rebounds, 4 assists. And also, probably the most famous news in the basketball world right now is the fact that LaMelo Ball's brother, LiAngelo, is one of the hottest rappers out there right now. Just listen to his song, Tweakin', and everyone, I'm telling you, everybody in the league is talking about it. Lonzo's talking about it as well. Lonzo actually worked on the lyrics, by the way, for that song. And LaMelo was working on the lyrics for that. LaMelo was not working on the lyrics, but LaMelo was repping it, and everybody was repping that song for for majority of the weekend and the last few days. So that's really the funniest thing that I learned. And that song is not even that bad, honestly. I'm sure if you guys have been following Big Baller Brand and their brothers for a while, you know that they have a little bit of rapping on the side. Lonzo was rapping a little bit. And a lot of people, when he was on the Lakers, a lot of people were saying Lonzo should just quit and become a full-time rapper because this NBA stuff isn't working out. But that being said, still go ahead and check out the song. I think it's pretty solid. Let's see. The Utah Jazz, they beat the Orlando Magic because the Orlando Magic don't have Franz Wagner or Paolo Banchero, so no real surprises there. Not going to talk about that game that much. Pacers, they seem to be winning again. They won 113-99 against the Brooklyn Nets, but again, it's the Brooklyn Nets, so not really all that impressive. Halliburton had 23 points, Benedict Mathurin had 30, and Siakam had 19. The Magic, they ended up beating the Knicks after losing to the Jazz, but a big reason why I think they ended up beating the Knicks was because the Knicks are lacking in Karl-Anthony Towns because he is hurt. So, not sure how long he's going to be out for, but hopefully not very long. He's lucky that All-Star break is going to come up, is going to be around the corner, so he'll have time if it is a major injury. But with that being said, Bridges had 24, Josh Hart had 15 and 14, Brunson had 24, and the rest were unable to produce. They really need Karl-Anthony Towns. Cole Anthony for the Magic had 24, Caldwell Pope had 15, and keep in mind this is without Paolo Banchero and Franz Wagner, so this Magic team is much better than what I thought they were. The Grizzlies, they ended up beating the Dallas Mavericks, and Jaren Jackson Jr. had 35. No Ja Morant in this game. Scottie Pippen Jr., 18 points. Jalen Wells, 17 and 11. And on the Dallas Mavericks side, there was no Luka Doncic, and there was no Kyrie Irving. Klay Thompson was the last line of defense, and what does he do? He drops 15 points, goes 5 for 16, and 3 for 8 from 3. I think it is clear now, Klay Thompson is washed. Now, Phoenix, they ended up beating the 76ers, because of course they did. 76ers are bad. They're not good, and they don't have Joel Embiid in this game. Maxey had 31 and 10, but it was all for nothing. Paul George had only 13 points. PG-13, ladies and gentlemen. 9 rebounds, and 5 assists. Again, just pitiful performance from Paul George. Really bad performance overall for Paul George. Only 16 points per game. He has been descending rapidly. Kelly Oubre Jr. was the only other solid player aside from Maxey, where he ended with 26 points and 9 for 18 from the field. Devin Booker did not play well in this game, 10 points, 10 assists. Kevin Durant played solid, 23 points, and Bradley Beal surprisingly played better than both of those guys coming off the bench with 25 points. So yeah, Pistons, they ended up beating the Portland Trail Blazers, but again, it's the Blazers, so not all that impressive. Cade Cunningham had 32 points, 9 assists, and 6 rebounds. Very impressive. Tobias Harris, who is having a much better season than Paul George, by the way, 17 points. Tim Hardaway Jr., 26 points. And on the Trailblazer side, Fernie Simmons had 36 points. So, pretty solid stuff. Bucks, they beat the Raptors. Not going to talk about that because the Raptors are tanking. The Timberwolves, they beat the Clippers. What to say about this game? Anthony Edwards was a dog. 37 points, 8 assists, 7 rebounds. Rudy Gobert put up a pitiful 8 points, but 18 rebounds, so I guess. But this game was all Anthony Edwards. This game, that was literally it. James Harden had 22, 8, and 8. Norman Powell had 25. But again, that just wasn't enough for Anthony Edwards, and they ended up winning by just 2 points. The Spurs, they ended up losing to the Bulls because the Bulls have the power of LiAngelo Ball's new song. Zach LaVine dropped 35 and 10. Also 8 assists. Kobe White had 23 points. Also, Lonzo Ball is back and better than ever. So happy to see him back. Vucevic had 24 points and 11 rebounds. And Lonzo, as I mentioned before, he's back, but still kind of mad with the scoring. 5 points, 4 rebounds, 2 assists. He did have 3 steals in 24 minutes. So again, pretty solid stuff for only playing 24 minutes. And on the Spurs side, Victor Wembanyama, 23 points, 14 rebounds, 4 assists, and 8 blocks. 8 blocks is ridiculous. And then finally, the Kings, they ended up beating the Miami Heat in overtime. And this was a DeMar DeRozan legacy game, I guess you could say. 30 points. He scored all of the points in overtime. And Sabonis ended with 21, 11, and 18. And again, this is without De'Aaron Fox. So maybe they might be interested in trading De'Aaron Fox, seeing how this team is playing without him. So not entirely sure how that's going to work. But that's it for the recap, and that's all I have for this show. So thank you so much for tuning in to the GSMC Sports Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. Your support means a lot to us, so remember to subscribe to the show, leave a positive review. It really does make a difference. We invite you to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, and Instagram for more content and updates. As usual, we love to hear what you guys have to say during the show, whether it's a hot take, burning question, something you're dying to share. We're all ears. If you want your comment or question to get noticed, I recommend using Super Chat. Click on the $ below the chat box. If that's not really your thing, then you can always use the link displayed below the ticker, gsmcpodcast.net, and send in your comments and or donations that way. Either or really helps the show. That's all that I have for today. Thank you so much for tuning in. I am your host, Nelson, and as always, take care.
Let's go.
I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee